Hello, and welcome to the Child Voice Podcast. We are the podcast that explores ideas, resources, and conversations that help children and families thrive. I'm your host, Mary Rose Swan, and today we're talking about the 5 protective factors from strengthening families, which is a training that Carrie Porter, who is my guest today, will be putting on in June. These are simple but powerful concepts that help create stronger families and safer environments for children. So, Carrie, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me, and especially to talk about strengthening families, which is my bread and butter. So yeah, let me move this over. So
Talk a little bit about how you got involved with strengthening families.
so I was actually trained on this model in 2017 in Colorado, where I was working for child welfare. This is something that the state of Colorado was really passionate about, I guess, because of the benefits that folks were seeing. And so this is actually a model or a framework. You'll kind of hear that it's a framework that we actually required all of our caseworkers to go through. And so we trained caseworkers and then community partners, GALs, therapists, a lot of early childhood educators, parents as teachers, really anybody and everybody that worked with children and families in the county that I was working was trained in it. It actually opened up the door for a lot of different grant purposes, funding opportunities, things like that. Knowing that there was benefits if the families, we'll get into this obviously a bit more in the training, but the whole idea, right, is that if the families have these 5 protective factors, they're less likely to abuse or neglect their children. So win-win for everybody.
Absolutely, win-win. I actually have a list of strength protective factors printed that I've always, well, maybe not always, but posted in my office so that I have kind of a reference to those and can kind of check in on protective factors because I took your training a couple of years ago and I thought it was fantastic. So you will need to go ahead and share your screen because it looks like the recording may have stopped the screen share.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you for letting me know that. Okay. Is it, are we seeing it now?
I'm not seeing it.
Hmm. Slide. Okay, so we'll stop share
Uh,
and then we'll try to share again. Screen two.
there we go. Now we're cooking with gas.
All right.
It started. It hasn't quite come up yet. There we go. Now I can.
Okay, perfect. Gotta love
Oh.
technology. I have personally a love-hate relationship with technology. So
So okay. So at the top of this, we have our first protective factor: be resilient. So what does resilience mean in the context of family?
yeah, so resilience, I think sometimes resilience is an overused word, but in this sense, and with the 5 protective factors, it's a word that we're going to use. And for me, resilience comes down to the ability to bounce not only back, but how do we bounce forward, right? So trauma, stress, things happen within family context. Things happen within life, right? It's how do we cope with those things? How do we cope with the stress? How do we cope with the hard days, right? How do we adapt during those challenges? And again, how do we grow from it? And that's really the big thing. The big takeaway for me with resilience, and I can actually even go to that particular slide that I appreciate about resilience is it's a muscle, right? And so the more we use it, the stronger it's going to get. And what I like about all of these, and sorry, I'm just skipping through all of this to get to, I want to get to resilience, um, is that all of these, I guess, with all of the 5 protective factors, you're going to hear me say too, it's not only how do we build these within the parents that we're working with, but how do we start instilling these in children, knowing that then they're going to take that and use that skill then as a parent. And so we have the opportunity really to change generations by us modeling resiliency, then our children are learning resiliency. So then as they continue and grow up and become caregivers themselves, possibly, then they're also, modeling that resilience. resilience. And so you'll see on the slide that I have right here too, right? They're future oriented and they're hopeful. They recognize that, yes, this current season in life is not going to last forever. This certain trauma, this certain sadness, this certain economic hardship, whatever's going on, that this doesn't have to determine their future. It's okay, what are we going to learn from this and how are we going to pivot, I guess, right? How are we going to pivot? How are we going to learn? And how are we going to bounce back from this?
Absolutely. And we hear the word resilience a lot in working with children involved with the foster care system. And I think that sometimes there's this inherent just belief that children are more resilient at times than adults because it's so interesting because I think we frame that because we want to believe that children are going to be able to go through these hard situations. But I think it also can breed some ideas about whether or not people think that they should or shouldn't struggle. So can you maybe speak a little bit to resilience and how we maybe frame that around child welfare and the child welfare system?
Yeah, again, like I said, I think it's one of those, like I said, maybe overused words.
Yeah,
But yes, it's the fact that, and we know that trauma or hard things impact all of us differently, right? That we know it's going to happen, and so with the children, yes, whether it's genetics, whether it's environment, whatever the case may be, right? Like we all react to things in our world differently. And that's, I feel like, where resilience comes in, right? Have I had an opportunity to practice resilience more? Have I had somebody modeling resilience for me? And so all of that's going to really play a role in the children and in the parents we work with. So let's say, we know that we often see, generational cycles in the child welfare system and the parents, right? How were they raised? Were their parents resilient? Was it, hey, when tough times happen, we sit down, we talk about it. What did we learn from this? And we figure out how to move forward. Or do we let it get the best of us and we kind of stay stuck in that place for a lot longer? Or, our communication breaks down, our relationships break down. Do we come from a culture where we ask for help? Where it's okay to take a break, where it's okay to say, I'm not okay right now, and let other people, come alongside me and help. And so a lot of it is the environment, a lot of it is culture. You're going to hear really throughout the high level overview of strengthening families this morning, culture plays a huge role into all of the protective factors. Culture does. But then, like I said, also just kind of like I said, the environment that we grow up in and culture, not even just surface culture, but that deeper culture of what side of town did I grow up in? What state did I grow up in? All of that when we're talking about culture. I don't want us just to think about, race, ethnicity type culture, but that deeper culture of no, we handle things by ourselves, or no, it's okay to ask for help type of things. And it really comes down to those coping strategies and how do we walk with the children and families that we're working with through this process of seeing like your current reality doesn't have to be your future reality.
absolutely. Oh, I love that you touched on so much of that because I was thinking, there is so much within the culture of, we're in Montana and just looking at what community looks like here and how, even rural communities are very close and they know each other, but they're not necessarily knowing everyone's business doesn't always necessarily translate into being supportive of families when they need support, especially if it's something that they feel shame about, like if they're involved with foster care. So I guess what would be one of or how can we as professionals or just people in day-to-day life help support resilience in families?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're going to see, I have a slide up here, but I'm going to not necessarily read the slide, but yeah, how do we come alongside and help the families and the caregivers, whoever it is that we're working with, right? Meet them where they are. How do we see them for people first, right? And I think that's going to be a big theme throughout this too, is we have to come into this without judgment. We have to come in with a mindset of being curious, asking questions, meeting them where they are. The other big thing in the strengthening families framework is biases. We all have biases. How do we name them, claim them, and tame them, right? So how do we check our biases at the door when we're coming to work with our families and meet them where they are so they don't feel judged. They don't feel like So part of it too is like, how do we normalize a lot of these things? And we all struggle, right? Bad things are going to happen. It's how do we get through those bad things? And so you can see on here too, right? So what it looks like, that hope, optimism, problem solving, come alongside them, encouraging them, identifying their strengths. Obviously in the name, right? Strengthening families is about identifying those strengths too, that every family has those strengths. How do we help them identify them sometimes when they can't even identify themselves? Which I know sounds silly, but even if you think about yourself, we all have a really hard time identifying our own strengths, where we're really quick to pick up on what we're not doing well or our challenges, but we all struggle for some reason with identifying what do we do well. And sometimes we may be the only one in court, in meetings, highlighting and identifying, those strengths, and let's build on those strengths. Um, so you can see on here too, so some everyday actions, that we can do is how do we demonstrate to the parents that they are valued? This kind of again goes back to that you are the parent, you are the expert on your children, and how do we make sure that your voice is being heard? That culture piece that we talked about already. Giving them ideas like, hey, this is what works for me when I'm stressed out or overwhelmed. Maybe that would work for you, or what has worked for you in the past. What hasn't worked for you in the past when you just seem to be overwhelmed or stressed. Um, and then the last one really too is helping parents understand how to buffer their child during stressful times. So again, if you know that you don't handle stress well, where can you safely put your child, right? So this will even go back to, having a newborn baby. It's okay to put them in the crib and walk away, right? And so putting yourself in a timeout, that separation piece. And so how do we make sure, because that's when abuse and neglect happens, right? Like you get stressed, you don't have the appropriate coping skills or tools to handle it, and baby won't quit crying. That's when shaking happens, right? That's when frustration happens. And so how do we teach them to have those coping skills and those techniques, or again, even just that buffer in place that when you're stressed out and overwhelmed, where can this child be safely?
I think that beautifully segues into our next factor, which is have friends. So this is really like not just friends, like, hey, this is my friend, but social connections. And harkening back to what I said just a minute ago, community. So why are relationships such an important part of a family's well-being?
Yeah. And I think with this one too, like you said, it's just not the having friends. To me, it's those positive social connections, right? So who are the people in your life that are gonna help you be the best version of you that you can be? Right? And sometimes that's hard. With the families that we're working with, oftentimes their social connections are who they used with, who are also maybe struggling, with child welfare. And so this, I think, sometimes it is a hard one, right? Is who are the positive people in my life? Social connections are, and positive social connections, super important. We're not meant to do life in isolation. One of the facts that we even talk about in this training is that not having connections, so being socially isolated, is the equivalent of smoking like a pack of cigarettes a day. It
Ugh.
makes a huge it makes a huge impact on our physical bodies. But at the same time, like we all need help sometimes, right? So who are you going to call? Yeah, going back to that last one, who can be my buffer, right? Who can I call when I just need to vent, when I need to say, hey, can you take little Johnny for me for a few minutes, right? Like I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed out. Can you help me out a little bit? No one wants to feel like they're abnormal or that they're different. And that's where those social connections can really come into play that, oh yeah, like my kid did that too, right? Super normal, they'll outgrow that type of thing.
Right, exactly. And I think that it's also kind of in talking about that, I don't want to skip too quickly over social connections, but I do think that there is a lot to that when it comes to when you say positive, I guess what would be we said friends, but what would to you be a good, like a well-rounded list of people that would be healthy social connections for a person to have?
Yeah, and I think sometimes it can be your friends, right? So I think that's a hard um you have to do some reflection, right? So is this friend going to help me support me in my sobriety, or are they going to be encourage me to go use with them? right? Same thing with relatives. I think positive social connections can be relatives, but sometimes it also means no, they're not, right? And having those boundaries in place. A good neighborhood, faith community, um, even just, yeah, like your town or, when it comes to culture, right? So who else shares my culture with me? Different support groups, right? I mean, there's a reason why AA, NA, all of those groups that they work. I mean, there's a reason behind that. Coworkers, right? Other parents, is there, can you join something at the school? I don't know if PTO, PTA is a thing anymore, right? But what is the school doing to connect other parents? Are there play groups? The library offers amazing opportunities for parents to come together and connect with each other. It doesn't necessarily, it's not about the number of social connections. It's, if you have one or two really strong, safe, supportive people that are going to have your back, that's what it's like. It's not about having 100. It's, yeah, I have one or two people that I know I can go to that's going to be there for me, that understands where I'm coming from, that understands my triggers, that understands when I'm not at my best and can call me out on that, that can say, hey, again, bring Susie over here. I can tell you're stressed out. I've got you, type of thing.
Yep, absolutely. I think that in so many of those situations, like even thinking about like our YMCA that we have here in Billings and
Mhm.
places like that, and it's hard. I think that that's also, we tend to, when we're not practicing our friend making skills, it is really uncomfortable to have to reach out to people you don't know and make yourself vulnerable and make yourself knowable to others. But the payoff is usually so much greater than the initial discomfort once you get past it.
Yeah, it is hard. I didn't realize how hard it was until as an adult, right? Moving states, moving communities. As an adult, it's hard. Yeah, it's really hard to put yourself out there and to make new friends.
Which I think also in a new community or even in one that you've been in but maybe not necessarily participated in, this also will move kind of right into the third factor, which is know how to find help. So are this why, I guess, in this, why is this so important?
Yeah. So, this one is gonna, and I'll skip over to that one. Sorry, it's a concrete supports in time of need, right? So this, I think, really ties well into social connections and the concrete supports that sometimes it's going to be us as professionals that can help bridge that gap, right? So going with them, sometimes even to that play group, or, and when we start talking about the concrete supports, that it may be us sometimes, being vulnerable with them that, hey, I'll go with you, right? Or if you happen to know somebody that's already part of a support group or part of a community service provider, go with them, hold their hand, not, figuratively, not literally, but, you know, be able, or maybe, yeah, or maybe literally. Yeah, exactly. Because it is so hard. And so social connections compared to concrete supports in time of need are a little bit different in the fact that concrete supports in time of need are going to be typically more those service providers in your community. And so, do you know who to reach out to for housing, for medical care, for mental health care? If there's a problem with your Medicaid, these are going to be like, hey, when everything is crap hits the fan, right? And I need supports and services that are going to support my family. This is where those concrete supports in time of need come in. The food stamps, or hey, I'm out of, my TANF money has run out, or my food stamps, isn't working. Where can I go for food resources? What does that look like for childcare? Is there any scholarships available that can help me with this? All of those things, again, it's usually in times of crisis. So we're kind of going back to what we talked about with resilience. In times of crisis or stress, do you know where to go to get help? To feed your family, to house your family, to clothe your family, to get your children the supports and the services they need. This is where concrete supports in time of need come into place. Having the right social connections, they may be able to connect you with these folks. But if not, this is where us as professionals, we need to know what's available in our community and able to connect the families we serve with the supports available to them.
And you're right. I think that knowing those things is wonderful. Sometimes getting that next step, which is that discomfort of having to reach out. We talked about going along with someone to do that, but it just frankly sometimes it's just really difficult for people to ask for help, even when they know now where they can find it.
Yeah, absolutely. We do a fascinating, I think. I don't know if you remember the activity in this one, asking for help, and how many of us would even ask for help, right? And we do a couple of, kind of cheesy scenarios like, okay, would you ask for help if there's no toilet paper in your stall, right? Versus would you ask for help if you need to feed your family? And you're right. I think asking for help, we often, jump in, well, why didn't they just say something? Or why didn't they just ask for help? Or we gave them the list of all these resources. Why didn't they take advantage of it? Well, because asking for help is really hard. It comes with, again, this is where culture can play, stigma, judgment, failure, being hard on themselves, that it
Uh,
sounds easy to ask for help, but it is super hard. And so even just ask yourself, right? Like, am I good about asking for help? And some of us are better asking for help than others. And so how do we normalize that we all need help sometimes? How do we make it easier? How do we break down barriers? This is where warm referrals, warm handoffs, going with the family can really make a difference. Think about like with your own kids as they become, they turn 17, 18 years old, right? Trying to teach them how to make their own medical appointments, right? This would be a perfect example of that one. Okay, I'm going to do it this time and you're going to listen. Next time you're going to do it, right? And I'm going to listen and or provide coaching. And then the next time you're going to do it all by yourself, right?
uh,
Something very similar with this that, yes, I'm going to go with you. Or can I give you a name of who you're going to call and ask for? Can I tell you what documents you're going to need to access this service? Again, how do we break down as many barriers as possible so families feel comfortable, equipped, yeah, with just reaching out and actually, reaching out and utilizing the service or the support.
and I think that's really important because I feel like there is that subtle shift that you can make from trying to empower someone to then somehow starting to do the things for them. And it's really important to kind of know where that boundary is because it's, it's trite as it is, the whole teach a man to fish analogy is true, is that, we can lay out all of the lures, we can provide the pole, we can do everything, but when it comes down to it, unless they're putting their pole in the water, and we need to be there to kind of encourage them every step of the way. And getting the pole in the water is really going to be up to that family. And, you
Yeah,
know, so that I think is,
absolutely. I think, something I just want to mention here too, what we're just talking about right now, this is active efforts, right? So you hear the word active efforts thrown around in the child welfare world all the time. Active efforts is exactly what we just said, teaching the man to fish, going with them, giving them, this is who you're going to call, this is the documents you're going to need. Hey, or this is the food bank, go to this one on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock in the morning, have a laundry basket with you, right, to take it with you. That's active effort. The coming alongside, meeting families where they are, connecting them to the resources and the tools, normalizing it, that is active efforts.
yep, absolutely. So I do want to make sure we're moving into our next one because I know we're trying to make sure we're going to keep this beautiful and keep it brief. So the fourth factor is going to be know how children grow. So I guess I would love to know a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah. So this one kind of in the framework world, right, is knowledge of parenting and child development. This one is really comes down to, do I have realistic expectations for my child at this age or at this stage? When we see parents have unrealistic expectations, that's when frustration happens, that's when stress happens, that's when abuse happens, right? So they need to understand what is normal, what is not normal. Like, yes, you can't be leaving your 3-year-old, alone for 2 hours while, you go wherever. And so understanding, but also then understanding when is it maybe time that I get additional services or support? So maybe understanding that, hey, maybe my child is not where they need to be when it comes to child development, and we need to get OT, PT, speech. And so a lot of it is just understanding what is developmentally normal. And then they can be more prepared, they can be calm, they can be more effective, and they'll need to, they can know when to go get those resources. So.
Absolutely. Well, and I think you gave a great example of all of those things, both on the side of not having unrealistic expectations of a child, but also in understanding when maybe they may have some things that might need to be addressed to keep them from falling too far behind.
Mhm.
So I guess, is there like maybe a, I'm an analogy person. I think things make more sense to my brain when I have like an example or an analogy to go with. So what's an example of knowing more about child development and how it would help an advocate?
Yeah, so um, it goes back to meeting, how we're talking a lot about how meeting the parents where they are. This is about meeting the child where they are. It's kind of two-part, right? It's that knowledge of parenting, which is parenting classes. And do you have the tools? Do you have the tools, right? A lot of times, parents parent how they were parented, right? I know that's a lot of the same word, but if you don't know how to parent differently, you're going to parent how you were parented. And sometimes we often see that it was not appropriate. And so a lot of times as advocates, and we're seeing more and more young parents come through with babies, getting them the tools, right? I mean, as we all know, parenting doesn't come with a book. Like, here's how to raise, here's how to raise your little one. And oftentimes it is that knowledge piece. What is appropriate? What's age appropriate? No, my 2-year old is not purposely, trying to defy me. I mean, they don't even have that, that ability to. At the same end, right, with teenagers, right? Okay, that independence piece, not every teenager is ODD, oppositional defiant, right? They're just being a normal teenager. And so it's all about having the skills and the tools. And so coming alongside the parents that we work with, either modeling it for them, having those conversations, getting them in classes so that they know how to interpret those behaviors, that they understand, okay, this is what my child is trying to express to me through behavior when they can't express it through words. How do we then, if we understand what our child is going through, we can be more patient. We know how to guide them. We can, oh, this is normal. This is not normal. Maybe they need additional support. So as advocates, again, kind of, normalizing like, oh no, it's very normal for the baby to do that, right? Or yes, it's very normal for kids to throw temper tantrums when they're thirsty, tired, or hungry, right? Kind of going back to our TBRI training. So normalizing it, sometimes even just providing humor that all we can do is laugh, right? Like you're either going to laugh or you're going to cry. So let's laugh about this, mom. So a lot of it is normalizing it, getting them connected, but then also um, realizing too that not every parenting class is a one size fits all. And so what works for one child may not work for another child. And instead of getting frustrated and feeling like you're beating your head up against the wall, okay, let's find some different tools on how to parent this child because it's not a one size fits all. Parenting for me is all about having more tools in the toolbox and trying to figure out which one works on which day with which child. And so just even having some of those conversations with the parents that we work with, especially these brand new parents that maybe want to do things differently than how they were parented.
Well, it's so true, and I think that for myself, I think even as someone who has parented two kids, for the most part successfully, it took actually seeing examples of seeing other people parent differently than the way I was parented, that modeling piece, and being able to actually find people and examples of the way I would like to see my parent, not even how the children behave, but how I respond to their behavior is, I think, a big piece of that. And that, I think, again, beautifully segues into our final factor that we're talking about today. Now, remind me, how many total factors are there in strengthening families?
Yeah, so there's 5. Yeah, there's the five protective factors. Sometimes you'll hear that there's different trainings or different models that add a sixth factor, nurturing and attachment. But the particular model that I was trained in and that I do the training on, there's five protective factors.
Okay, wonderful. So this is a very like holistic look at all of them. I have a list that includes a lot of these, but actually has more. But the last one that we were going to talk about, the fifth factor today, was help kids handle their feelings. Oh my goodness. And I feel like as adults, we have a hard time handling our feelings. So tell me more about what like strengthening families would help us with in terms of this fifth factor.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right. I think this, again, applies to both children and a lot of times the adults that we work with. This protective factor is a little bit different in the sense that all the other four are all about supporting and coming alongside and educating and teaching the parents. This one is all about the child, right? So, and with the caveat, maybe some of the adults that we work with. How do we interact with our world, right? Are we able to identify our emotions, not only in ourselves, but in others? How do we communicate those feelings, right? Are we communicating with words or fists, right? How do we solve problems? How do we solve conflict with other people? It's all about, again, how do we relate to those other people in the world around us? How do we have those healthy relationships? That's what this one's really all about.
Oh, well, it's interesting because I think even as an adult myself, who considers herself to be someone who, I tend to also retreat into maybe being more like sullen at times and saying like, I don't like this. So it's interesting because even as an adult, I can say there are times that I don't verbalize my feelings so much as act them out and expect other people to understand them. So, as you know, how can adults like me help children develop those skills?
Yeah. I think, yeah, absolutely as adults, right? And a lot of times children that have experienced abuse or neglect, they struggle with social emotional competence, right? Like they don't understand what the facial language or the body language is telling me, or it's mixed signals, right? And so, um, and I've experienced this, even with some older, teenagers that weren't able to read my facial expressions accurately. And so this one is about how do we model that healthy emotional regulation? So yeah, it's validating the feelings that it's okay to not feel okay, but what are we going to do with that? Are we going to scream and yell and cuss and hit somebody? Or are we going to take a deep breath? Are we going to ask questions? And so a lot of this is about those coping skills. How do we come alongside and model it for them? Um, we have even at the CASA office in those little bags that we put together, we have those little cards, those little facial cards, and we encourage advocates come and get those and practice acting out. Like, okay, what would a frustrated face look like? What would a sad face look like? Or, hey, I'm making this face right now. What do you think this face is trying to tell you? And so a lot of times it's teaching them, it's modeling, and again, even for the parents, right? It kind of goes like, okay, are you gonna get more done and more sympathy or more empathy, with this behavior, dad, or with this behavior? And so, a lot of times it's creating that safe space for them to feel how they feel, but then what are we going to do with those feelings, in order to move forward?
Absolutely. And so, I guess I know the answer to this question, but I think I'll ask it just because I think that the answer will benefit everyone. Is why are these emotional skills so important in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, they just help us get along with people, right? No one wants to be in around, an adult that comes in and always is screaming and yelling and demanding. And so it really comes down to those relationships. It's gonna impact how you become as a parent, how you get along with, do you have friends at school? Are you the bully at school? Can I ask questions? Can I read other people's? Can I read just the room and those social cues, which in the long run is going to help your mental health? I think this social emotional competence is going to help then going back, right, to the social connections, the concrete supports in time of need. If you don't know how to manage your emotions and communicate effectively, you're going to have a hard time making friends and you're going to have a hard time getting the supports and services you need, um, I guess, in a friendly manner. So, and at the end of the day, right, then it helps us handle our stress and builds those healthy connections. And so, this to me, like I said, we all need to learn how to play nice in the sandbox. It doesn't mean we have to like other people, it doesn't mean we have to agree with them, but how can we agree to disagree professionally? How can we try to find one thing that we agree on? You know, oftentimes in our world, it's like, hey, we all have the same goal of getting your child back to you, back to a safe, healthy, you know, thriving environment. We may not agree on how to get there, but we have the same goal. We can either do that through anger and yelling and screaming and fighting the whole time, or we can figure out how to work together to get this goal accomplished.
Absolutely. And it's not always just about getting along for the sake of getting along, but we do find that cooperatively we can get more things done. That's the whole part of community and
Mhm.
building community, is that as people that cooperate, we have so much more power than as individuals who really just want to see like our own ideas, thoughts, or emotions put at the forefront versus being able to say this is going to collectively impact all of us, even if it's just this unit of people that are trying to make sure that kids are safe and happy and where they should be, which
Mhm.
ultimately want them whenever possible to be back with their parents as long as it is safe and appropriate. So, well, I think it's probably a good thing for us to get wrapped up. So I guess for you, are there any things that you hope that the listeners today remember about these protective factors?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I think this was a very, very quick overview, right? So the actual training is 14 hours. But I think really the highlights that come out of the training is it's those small everyday actions, right? This is not life changing. This is not like completely revamping how you work with families. It's meant to be kind of just being more intentional, right? Am I meeting families where they're at? Am I being curious? Am I asking those questions? Am I coming in with a lot of biases? Am I coming in with judgment? And so a lot of it really is going to come down to those small everyday actions that you can do, checking yourself at the door. What assumptions am I making about this family? Am I looking for strengths? Am I building on those strengths? Um, and at the end of the day, it really comes down to anybody and everybody that works with children and families. This is not a child welfare thing. This is not a CASA thing. This is from your daycares to your teachers to whoever, anybody that works with children and families, if we can come alongside and support them in building these protective factors, right? Having resilience, having those positive social connections, knowing where to go for those concrete supports in time of need, understanding, having the tools to parent your child and understanding what's developmentally appropriate. And again, how do we play nice in the sandbox? If we can all be intentional about building these with the families that we work with, the end result, right, is going to be safer, healthier environments. The goal here is that it's prevention, right? It's how do we intervene and recognize when families are stressed and burnt out down, at square one, and not waiting for the abuse and neglect to happen, not waiting for them to become part of the child welfare system. It's all about how do we come alongside and support families sooner rather than later.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I really do appreciate you going through all of these factors, breaking them down so eloquently. This is very bite-sized compared to the full training, which I was lucky enough to get to attend in 2024. And I know Carrie does offer that at various times. So if you are a CASA of Yellowstone County, please reach out. We do want to make sure that you're aware of when those trainings can happen if you're interested in joining them. So thank you, Carrie, for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for letting me talk about my passion. Like I said, I could talk for 14 hours straight about this. So
Well, and I just want to also say thank you to everyone that's listening to the Child's Voice podcast. We've gotten such great feedback from our advocates, and we love sharing what we're sharing. And we'd love to hear from you if there are particular topics that you think that we could discuss in this fun little environment that Carrie and I have been working in for the last few months. So we hope that today's conversation gave you some really practical insight into the ways that we can help strengthen families and support children. So until next time, we'll see you later.